Hey, welcome to your weekly corner Späti. It is me, Kieran. I'm joined by Uma.
Hello.
And Nick.
Hello.
And today we have returning guest and independent journalist, Hanno Hauenstein. How are you getting on, Hanno?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again. So fun to be back.
And naturally, when we have Hanno on, it's to talk about cheerful things and how Germany is doing great. And it's all fine. Don't worry about it. Definitely the issue. Fortunately, we have Hanno on to talk about Namibia later, but first we're going to talk about the Berlin Four because this was big news for left-wing circles in the city, particularly anyone focused on deportation, Palestinian kind of like solidarity movements. And yeah, based on your original reporting, and I would just kind of love to kind of like get your understanding of what was happening here and how it fits into like the wider political moment in Germany, because I was personally shocked when I first heard this story, and now that it's a couple of weeks later, I feel stupid for being shocked that this had happened almost. So yeah, I'd love to kind of get your take on this in this moment.
Sure. I mean, like, I think both reactions make sense. Like, what is, I think, most shocking about these cases is like the degree to which migration law is leveled against protest and leveled in a way to silence dissent, specifically with regard to people who are citizens of the European Union. And I think that's what's been like most shocking to many people reading the story. And like the way I kind of look back on it now, I honestly didn't expect this story to make such a splash, as it were. Not always, it's not like a given that like things reported abroad in the US or like elsewhere on Germany are kind of picked up in Germany. And I wasn't sure if it would, but it did, like, I think, get to a lot of people also beyond the circles of that are active in anti-genocide protest and like the broader pro-Palestinian movement, or even just like concerned citizens with like Israel-Palestine. It really got to, so to speak, the liberals as well, because it is like a massive kind of legal overreach to the threshold for revoking someone the Freizügigkeit, the freedom of movement within the European Union as a European citizen is fairly high. And the fact that like you would order to revoke that, like to deport people from Germany, even though they have citizenship, even though they're part of the European Union, and on top of that, without any legal conviction, is specifically in this context something that I think was shocking to quite a few people. But at the same time, like what I meant earlier, like with this kind of like double perspective, like it's also true that this is like one particle of a much broader development of suppression of speech, specifically in the context of like Israel-Palestine. But I think in a way, like it also reaches beyond this. Like some of the things that are listed in those deportation orders, like blocking roads or like calling police officers of fascists, are things you can very like vividly imagine, and not only imagine, but you also see them in say the climate movement. And like I think in that sense, like it's pretty clear that what is happening here, I think, isn't limited to Palestine alone. I think this is often kind of like the testing ground, because like the discourse in Germany is very tendacious and very much leaning into a certain direction. So I think like people expect, like authorities, institutions, and the police expect there to be a larger kind of sense of agreeability on like repressive measures. But I think it would be naive to think that this would stop there.
I think one of the things that for me the shocking thing was, as you mentioned, kind of like the EU stuff, just because like I had no illusions that this didn't happen to asylum seekers, people who didn't have permanent residency, or third countries, I think the EU terminology would be someone not from Germany, not from an EU country.
Right.
But then like I didn't think that would be a line that was crossed, especially during this supposed like world change, like world order change, where like being in the EU is now so important, and like we need to unite, blah blah blah, in the face
Mhm.
of Russia, China, America. Just felt like a surprising moment. At the same time, I think in the reporting, the thing that was particularly upsetting is you also see the very German response of just kind of like, I guess, legality and following the rules, of like this pushback against it, of just been like, I can't remember what official body this is, but it said like, these orders don't seem terribly legal. Are you sure
Mm.
you want to go ahead with
Yeah,
this? Like
right.
even that getting steamrolled was upsetting.
Right.
To say
No,
the
there was
least.
you're right. There was a clear political pressure campaign that was leveled. This body you're referring to is like the Berlin Office of Immigration, like which formerly called Ausländerbehörde, which I think anyone in who, I guess you guys had to deal with that at some point, unless you're Europeans. Like, I don't know, like it's
We're all
None
privileged.
of all of
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
yeah, we're all. I mean, yeah, we're set.
Okay. Anyone who's not like a European citizen and comes to Germany has to deal with this office to some degree. They're the ones that like are issuing student visas, artist visas, or a processing a request for citizenship. And like they basically were requested to send out those deportation orders by the Berlin Senate, which is like the higher up like office, like which is basically underneath the mayor, and it's the Department of the Interior and Sport which requested those deportations. And so the Office for Immigration basically argued in an email exchange, which I obtained and I quoted in the article, that like it's basically illegal. There's not sufficient legal ground for revoking the citizenship, the Freizügig, the freedom of movement for those three EU citizens. In the fourth case, they didn't argue that way, even though that is also legally contestable. But like basically, what you need to know is that according to German migration law, you do not, in theory, need a prior conviction in order to like deport somebody. However, like there needs to be a certain balance. Like the state interest for deporting someone needs to be in like some sort of like legal equilibrium with like the person who's supposed to be deported interest to stay in the country. So if you have a family here or you have a business here, like all these kind of factors really play into the legal considerations. And in the European citizen cases, it's like the threshold is just like very hard. This is hardly ever done. And if it's done, it's done to people who pose a very serious like threat to Germans' public security. Anyway, so this email was like sent out back to the Senate by the Immigration Office. This is like formerly known as like a remonstration, basically saying like, sorry guys, but we don't have enough legal ground to do this. And the Senate kind of came back very clearly saying like, you guys have to do this. We are not accepting your remonstration, your way of showing that you're not agreeing with us. Yeah. So that kind of like political pressure is another thing which I think factored into this actually being noticed in Germany, because clearly there's like political overreach happening in the mayor's senate, in this kind of like right wing CDU senate.
Yeah, there's something that then I guess like for the listeners that then are outside of Germany that then kind of forget that this is a federal republic, and this seems to be one of the aspects where then like I forget that Germany is a federal republic until shit like this happens, because it is always very much this like pick and choose sort of like, oh, the states have power. Oh no, actually it's very much down from like the federal level. And we've kind of seen this done with then terminologies of things like what you can and can't say at protests, which then have then been like shut down by the Bundesverfassungsgericht as like, actually, no, you can't ban that speech. And then having it then turn back once again to then like, Berlin, and being like, actually, this is bullshit somehow connected to terrorism. Henceforth, actually in Berlin alone, it remains illegal. So
you're referring to like from the river to the sea,
Yeah, exactly.
for example. Or, yeah, sure. Yeah. Which is, by the way, which is one of the slogans that are listed in the deportation orders as reasons for deporting those people. But not only that, but also on the face of it, much more sort of like Free Gaza was also in there. Like it's in a way that, like it's quite remarkable. Like I will say that, like, you know, because a lot of people have complained. I mean, a lot. Some people on Instagram have complained that you know, like the headline of my article suggested a too close of a proximity with like the cases that were widely reported in the US with Mahmoud Khalil, and like people writing op-eds and being like picked up by ICE on the street. And yes, it's a slightly different case in the sense of like the allegations that are leveled against those four people are you know, like involve like breaking into and occupying a university building, and like they involve, you know, potential violence and like damaging things inside the building. However, at the same time, I will say, you know, like, again, there's no conviction whatsoever. There's no real proof that all of them have been there, because, you know, like they were allegedly all masked. And besides that, there are a lot of other things that are in those deportation orders that are like way lower in the sense of degree, and like allegedly, you know, kind of breaching Staatsräson, which again, as I think we actually spoke about this in the last episode, is not a legal category, but the way it's discussed often has this kind of like proto-legal sort of status. It inflates this kind of idea of like, we have to enforce this, even though it's just like symbolism.
Yeah, even, I mean, just kind of you know, mentioning very quickly the, like, although yes, they are two complete different scenarios and whatnot, and you know, the US's legality of deporting green card holders is definitely different from that of the European Union, you know, EU citizens, etc. But there was like, and I saw you post about this a lot, was how I specifically remember, I think it was an op-ed from the FAZ of someone just being like, yeah, actually, it's cool that the US is doing this. Like, maybe, you know, like the immediate reaction from like liberal German, like, you know, center right German media, I guess we can like be more fair to call it, of just kind of like, well, you know, really doing the like, well, actually, you don't understand, this is actually good that the United States is doing this. And then kind of very interestingly enough, like within, you know, a short amount of time, Berlin then does, you know, not saying that they're of course connected, they're not, you know, the media does not have that much of their hands into the dealings of Berlin politics, but you know, the kind of ground was already like more or less set for that. Then something like this has happened in the United States based solely on the grounds of Palestinian activism, and you saw German, you know, knee-jerk Staatsräson bullshit media be like, actually, this is fine. You know, maybe the United States has the right to do this, and it's good for doing so. So, like,
yeah, I think, like, you know, like it's Palestine in that regard is often kind of like a litmus test, I think, for the degree to which, you know, liberals will go in defending the right of free speech or the right of assembly or the right of like basically just expressing your opinion. In this specific article you referred to, I think the argument was, like, if it's the right one, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the argument was something like, you know, this looks bad for your American democracy, but as you just said, like, you know, maybe they have a point, which I think is a funny argument to make. You know, like it's quite obvious that they didn't have a point, and that's just like, frankly, out, you know, very obviously illegal what is being done. And then again, you know, like in Germany, what is a real similarity is the way in which like migration law is used as a political tool for people who have a legal right to be here.
Green card holder is, if I understand correctly, the closest in America you can get to like an EU citizen in a country they don't.
No, it's permanent residency. It's a bit different.
Yeah. That being said, the other thing, and I'd love to get your take on this, Hanno, that we've talked about in this show is just this all also feels like the consequence of there being a CDU government in Berlin, because I I do always get the impression, as someone, I have the worst German ability of everyone on the podcast, but I always get the impression that like the CDU in, say, like, oh, what's a good CDU state? Like Baden-Württemberg, right? They kind of like, we're here forever. We're the default party. We're going to manage things. Things are going to be great. You vote for us again. When the CDU come into Berlin, it's like, whoa, this never happens. Rip the copper out of the wall, salt the earth, take everything we can because we're being voted out next election cycle.
Yeah, I think too as well, like that's also, I mean, going into this is, you know, maybe I'm wrong here, but maybe also in the sense too with then who people that were being seen appointed to the possible next government, like Joe Cialo and whatnot. I think that then it also, like, Berlin kind of served as the like proving ground for like what then the CDU can kind of get away with next government on like a national scale, because of exactly that, of like there's this deep, you know, SPD kind of, you know, vibe that Berlin, I mean, yeah, the CDU has been in governance in Berlin before. This isn't like the first time, but it does happen so rarely. Like, well, the last time that then the CDU was like quite powerful in Berlin is when we got like a bunch of like police reforms and whatnot that had happened, which are still in
the last time. Wasn't the last time the time they bankrupted the state as well?
Don't ask about that.
Yeah, okay.
Conservatives would never do that. They're fiscally responsible.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But and I think that, yeah, like, I mean, just to kind of like piggyback on that, and I could be complete full of shit, is that I think that then not only this time around it's like, yes, rip everything out, you know, a scorched earth policy for Berlin, but also like this type of austerity we can do on a national level. Like the dumbest thing Berlin has done as of recent, aside from just like all the horrific shit, is that then now they're selling away the like naming rights to libraries. Like, you don't want to be like the United States. I'm from the United States. It's a garbage country. Like, it's nice here.
I'm looking forward to, like, no one plays a DJ set at any of the tourism clubs in Berlin City, but I'm looking forward to seeing like random pop musician at Uber Presents Music Arena or whatever.
I mean, there's already the Uber. Yeah.
Exactly. What's a dumber one? Ryan Mattal Presents.
No, it's actually it's gonna be the Open AI campus for the Stabi, I think, is what they're selling it.
God bless.
Thank you, Joe Cialo. I hope you do great on the national government.
OpenAI presents Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
Yeah, the whole state.
The whole state.
Wow. Yeah.
I wanted to ask though, like, obviously there was a massive international response to your article, but was there actually that much response from German media as well?
I mean, I was observing this rather closely, and there was much more of a response that I had anticipated initially. Like, Die Zeit reported, Der Spiegel reported, even Axel Springer reported, and Tagesspiegel reported. Like, Die Welt wrote a long article, which, you know, was surprisingly not that bad. I mean, like, you know, it's some of those. You know, it's obviously where the ideological inclinations lie, but I think people on the face of it just took it seriously as an issue. And this is something I didn't expect whatsoever. I think last time we spoke on this podcast, we spoke about like Axel Springer's involvement with like facilitating houses and rentals in occupied Palestine and the settlements in the West Bank and whatnot.
You remember the episode better than we do. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting. But like back then, this was hardly reported in Germany. Like, I think like only Deutschlandfunk picked it up. And so I was rather surprised by the degree to which it was reported. Whether that means, you know, that there will be a more heightened sensitivity for how the right basically on a broader scale is using, as you also just hinted at, you know, like is using this subject, you know, to kind of push through austerity schemes and like and defund culture and defund, you know, political actors they are not agreeing with. I mean, that's to be seen. I'm not sure, because I feel like the big reveal of like the last half year for me has been that like there is a real blind spot with liberals on this subject. Not only that the fact that they are often the ones driving the repression, but also when they, to the degree that that they are apparently oblivious or blind to the fact that the right and the far right is really using this subject to kind of brilliantly, honestly, like to kind of normalize themselves in public discourse and, to find ways in order to push their narratives with, without it seeming as if they are kind of the bad actors. When you look at this, I mean, this was just crazy to me when you looked at this conversation between the Twitter conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel. She was like, I don't know if you saw this, but
or the live one where they were like
the live one, yeah, like an hour of them talking to each other and kind of flirting with each other. Yeah, I know, what a wonderful image. You had Alice Weidel at some point kind of saying that Adolf Hitler was a communist,
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah,
in and of itself, such a bizarre sentence, but then she ended, like, literally the sentence right after was kind of referring to October 7th and how, like, the Palestinian left, the leftish Palestinians are like the new kind of heirs of anti-Semitism today. It's just amazing, like how, how the far right is very sort of experienced at this point in like using this kind of revisionism, historical revisionism, and coupling it with like this anti-Palestinianism, like in order to like to build on their narrative. And like you see it in Hungary and in France and Italy and everywhere else in the US and also in Germany. And I think that's something which, I think a broader liberal center hasn't really recognized yet. I think the CDU is not the AfD. There's no, I don't want to make a false equivalence here, but like I do think that it's pretty, like Kai Wegner himself met with Elon Musk and no one, took any issue with this. Like they portrayed themselves and made photographs together. But like when, a Palestinian and an Israeli Jew are standing on the stage of Berlinale, there's a huge uproar about anti-Semitism. I mean, there's a real discrepancy here and a real kind of like double standard, like where how those, standards are being applied. And I think the deportation cases just like show you, how, there's, I think the reason why this was done to them was also like in order to kind of send a signal and to kind of show, if we can do this to those guys, we can basically do it to anybody.
Yeah. And I think as well too, also mentioning with the sense of how this terminology, I mean, like you mentioned the sense of how like Alice Weidel kind of does this, but like Nancy Fraser also like threw out the term like Islamo-leftism, which is a very French thing coming into after the
Islamo-gauchism, of course.
Islamo-gauchism came into the German vocabulary after the Palestine Congress, when then like they're given like the government's position on it and this and that, and she's like, oh, there is this like Islamo-leftist connection. It was like I was not expecting in 2024.
I did see this actually, but as you say, like Nancy Fraser, she's like a SPD politician. You often have this sense that like it seems like in Germany the liberal established parties are kind of trying to compete with each other over who is most rigorous over this subject specifically, over showing that they're most pro-Israel, most kind of like, suppressing speech on this issue, and kind of not understanding how not only is this thing dangerous, but also they're kind of, they're really playing into the hands of the far right, which is just like cheering them on, like basically being happy about that.
Oh yeah, the movement of parties further right in Europe has been this, the absolute BS kind of thing that's been pumped to them. Like, oh, the way that you win elections is by trying to match them, which is shown in every case except for I think Kieran's Denmark, right, is the only.
Yeah, but that's only because they kind of like did it proactively.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like because of an asterisk reason.
The exception that proves the rule. Like every party that's tried to outflank the party to the right of them by being more right wing, this has never worked. This is like why Ciudadanos in Spain collapsed. It's why like Labour is like the most unpopular government in the UK at this point of their tenure in history. It just doesn't work, or if it works for one election cycle.
Yeah, I
agree. I also love that like when Alice Weidel said that Hitler was a communist, because again, going to the like Islamo-gauche kind of stuff, that is also something that has existed in far right circles in like the English speaking world for a long time. Just the whole confusion about like socialist being in the name National Socialist.
But it's same in Spain as well.
Yeah.
I think every brain dead person just thinks that because it's in the name.
My theory of this is that this is an American export that was done by like the John Birch Society. Like in the 50s. No, because that is their position that was in the 50s. That became like the norm of like libertarian politics in order for anti-statist stuff in like the 70s and 80s. And then gets like exported to Europe.
Oh, reframing the political spectrum to not be left and right. It's now statist and libertarian.
Yeah.
In which case, Stalin and Hitler are the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which then gets onto the like the left and right, like a reinterpretation of the left and right spectrum. Left means more state, right.
It's honestly, one could go really deep into this if one wanted to, but like I mean, there have been a lot like like this kind of sort of reductionist idea that like Soviet communism and National Socialism are more or less like the same kind of like flip sides of one coin is like in German historiography goes back to Ernst Nolte, which is like this kind of like conservative revisionist historian that like basically argued that like National Socialism was simply like a response to Soviet communism and like really try to paint them as like two parts of one picture. And like that in a way, I mean, Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, the one last living like representative of like critical theory today of philosophy, this like strain of philosophy, he argued against this in the 80s, and that's actually where this whole idea of like historical singularity of the Holocaust evolved, which is a big part of like German memory culture. And actually, I think personally, on the face of it is a really good historical achievement. It's like a progressive idea, but in a way it was set so absolute that like maybe this is a good transition to talk about Namibia, because you could really see how it was like conservatives were arguing, like referring to this historical singularity in order to reject attempts by kind of progressive like scientists like a few years ago, like to try to include like German colonialism into German memory culture. It's like such a strange way of like seeing how these like these arguments develop, and they're often like instrumentalized and misused.
Yeah, I do kind of remember, I think it was Deborah Feldman who said it, of like, if the Holocaust is this such like uniquely singular thing that kind of comes out of nowhere, what does never again truly mean? Mm-hmm. Because if it's so unique, how do we ever prepare for never again? But yes, you're right. This is a good transition, because then we do get to talk about Namibia. And I was
Unless
reading
you have other questions. I didn't mean to,
No, this is
short. Just
absolutely correct. Because I did enjoy, you wrote in your Substack, which I recommend people check out, your time in Namibia, I believe, and your reporting on it. Mm-hmm. I was initially struck by like just a very personal thing here. The first image of the woman in the museum, and she's like, she gets to like do a crossword, have this kind of sleepy job in a museum. I was like, that's the dream. I want that job for myself. And it's just like, oh no, but it's the evil museum. It's the museum of bad things that happened. And historical revisionism. I'm kind of curious at like, obviously I think we've covered Namibia, the first genocide of the 20th century, and Germany's like precursor to the Holocaust. But what I really enjoyed about your article is the kind of more, every time I've seen this discussed, it's always a bit too historical. It's a bit too, here's what happened, and a little less focused on, here's what's currently happening. I remember coverage of the 2021 kind of, don't call it reparations kind of agreement Germany got signed. Yeah. And even the coverage then was very, at least in English speaking world, was very lackluster. It didn't feel very, I was reading a very kind of like matter of fact pieces about it, and it still felt very insufficient. And I'm just kind of curious about, since you've been there, basically you're reporting on the ground of like, how people in Namibia responded to this, because that was always left out of the story.
Yeah. I mean, so went there with this human rights organization called Medico that like they are trying to basically, raise awareness, expand. They're like an international organization that works in different regions of the world, and they're trying to expand their like scope of action to Namibia and really shed light on like the degree to which the genocide has actually not been there have not been reparations. Not only that, but there has also not been a real discussion with the representatives of the groups that were most affected by the genocide, which are like, there is actually a number of indigenous groups at the time. Many of them fled to like near like regions of Africa that are now different states, that like the eastern states next to Namibia or South Africa. But like the most affected groups are Over Herero and Nama, and like so the OTLA and the NTLA, which are the representative groups of those kind of descendants of those victims, are kind of the direct partners of that Medico is working with, and they're really trying to, together with like forensic architecture, which is like this other group that is very good at like visualizing sort of atrocities and trying to do this deep research and understanding what took place at the time. So they are trying to like raise awareness, but also get an understanding for, like how this historical responsibility is really not met in the case of Namibia. And like it kind of just like exposes this idea of German memory culture, that which I still think like in the world is still looked at as this like huge accomplishment, but actually stops pretty short when you're on the ground. And like I think there were so many scenes, I don't even know where to start, but like I'm just traveling through this country, which is, for me, I was happy I was there as a journalist, not as a tourist. I think like as a German tourist, I would feel pretty weird being there, kind of like just seeing I mean, everyone speaks German. It's like the history of the colonialism is very much in the air. It's very obvious. Like a lot of the bars and restaurants you walk into, if you do that, you see like these kind of like imperial flags on the walls, and you see like das Deutsch Südwestli, the German Southwest song. Ooh. Which is really just like kind of colonial, sort of euphemism for kind of like sweet talking that time. And you see a lot of these black and white images that like feel kind of stuck in history, really. So yeah, I was happy to be there as a journalist, but like meeting with those groups, it's like there's hardly any. I mean, most of the people I've spoken with the descendant groups, they are not feeling represented by the Namibian government. And the government is trying to carve out a deal with Germany, which is not labeled as a reparations deal, because that would open the door for, many other things. It's labeled as like a kind of a reconstruction aid deal, which Germany obviously did because they did acknowledge that what has happened was a genocide. But even that acknowledgement came with a kind of caveat of like saying, according to the standards of the time. Which, if you think about it, is kind of bizarre, because you don't say this about the Holocaust, right? I mean, the Genocide Convention came into being after the Holocaust, and largely as a result of the Holocaust. But you don't say, well, it was a genocide according to what the kind of standards we established afterwards. And so it's a strange kind of wording that kind of relativizes the full acknowledgement of like what happened at the time, and kind of still leaves open that door for protecting kind of this national sense of like, well, it was bad. It was maybe war crimes, but it's not really clear because, we have to decide what we have to look at this, the kind of like standards and laws at the time.
I saw that quote in your article about like how it's the standards of the times are being applied, and it's like, well, that's problematic, because like, I don't know, like very few genocides that have occurred were like illegal by the standards of the country committing them. They always make like legal provisions of like, this is fine. That we're gonna do this.
I mean, slavery was legal at the time, right? I mean, this is not like these laws are being made by people who are. I mean, like, how come we suddenly judge historical atrocities by the legal apparatuses that are competent, that were active at that point in time in that space. Like it's really quite startling, to be honest. And when you're like, this image you were talking about earlier is like this is like a museum in Lüderitz, which is basically a city named after the person who was very instrumental in founding the German colony in Namibia, in today's Namibia, Adolf Lüderitz. And I mean, it's just like it's so kind of, it's almost like you feel like you're in a movie in a way. Like this is like, this museum is like 2 kilometers maybe away from a peninsula called Shark Island, which is like, used to be a concentration camp back in the days, set up by Germans, where they basically, I mean, really horrible things took place. And this is like a massive trigger warning for anyone who's listening, but like literally like, you know, women enslaved by German soldiers were forced to like scrape off the flesh of like skulls of their relatives for them to be sent to Germany to do like scientific experiments with those skulls. And the fact that you have a museum like 2 kilometers away today, and like this museum is exhibiting some of the kind of like, you know, jewelry and like artifacts of that those people over there have lost, is just like, it's like so in your face. It's kind of like you feel like, how is this even possible, you know?
Sorry, I haven't read the article. So is this museum framed as this, like this was a bad thing that happened and we're showing this, or it's just like, hey, this is our history, it's cool, whatever?
So it's
how
like,
is it framed?
It's really on the verge between, like, I would say, you know, erasure and glorification. It's really
Jesus,
bad.
okay,
like, yeah.
The worst. Yeah.
I mean, it's done by Namibians, but like these Namibians are Germans. They're like the descendants of German settlers, and they're white people. It's just like you have, it's kind of like it's departed in certain categories. It's like you have the Diamond Era and you have the German.
Oh my God, okay.
But they don't even call it colonial area. They just like show the kind of Kaufvertrag, the treaty of like the area was bought by German colonists, but like descendants are saying, you know, it was this treaty was flawed in many regards, and like much of the land that was like quote unquote captured, like stolen, was not part of the treaty. But you know, I think what's most shocking to me is that there's no, I mean, there's like, you see guns by those German soldiers that were active at the time. You see those like imperial flags. It's very much glorifying the German colonial history, and the way in which those indigenous tribes are depicted is like super racist. It's like you have the animals and then you have the tribes, and
oh my
like,
God, Jesus.
yeah, I mean, it's really, it's like it's kind of, if you imagine like a European museum that like, in which people are leveling all this criticism, it's like everything the European museums are trying not to do is happening over there. And I'm saying it like half ironically, but it's obviously quite shocking to see this and like see how, like, you know, I mean, I think this is really representative of like some of the mindset of the Germans / Namibians who live there, that like for them, it's kind of like this kind of history is sort of frozen in time. I don't think there's any shame. I mean, or very little, at least. There are some like, there's this one person, his name is Laidlaw Peringanda. He's like the only guy who he's like an artist, and he lives in a city called Swakopmund, which is like a coastal city. And he runs basically the only genocide museum, which is basically a tiny room adjacent to his house. And he often goes to those graves that are like unmarked and unnamed graves, like in the middle of Swakopmund, and like tries to kind of like keep them sort of in a state of, you know, where a lot of the victims of the genocide are buried. And he does that with like, often, like he told me, like a younger generation of like white Germans is like accompanying him, and like so there is like a younger generation of people who kind of, I think get the problem. So I don't want to be overly generalizing. I'm saying like this is like, there are some people who are sort of getting it, but it's still very stark and very in your face. It's kind of like, lack of conversation happening, basically. And like on a material level, like 70% of like the land is owned by whites, descendants of settlers, if they're German or Dutch or South African. Like it's just like the disproportionate, like, I mean, the way in which land is distributed is just like crazy. And like it's the other parts of Namibia are very, very poor. It's like there's tons of poverty. You really feel like the effect of colonialism today.
Yeah, the way that you describe the museum and the piece, I think, is very good, because it did kind of strike me as whenever we talk about German involvement in this land, whenever we talk about the colonial era, that's history, and everything else is natural history. Like the indigenous people are being treated the same as like the animals that you would see in like a natural history museum. It felt it was definitely the vibe there for sure.
I mean, doesn't the Natural History Museum in Berlin have like a lot of skulls?
They have the dignity at least to hide them.
Like, right, and they're big in their archives, though. At least.
In the archives.
Hide them in the archive, and they're not much better in that regard. I mean, it's like, I think the general problem is, like, I was talking about this with a friend recently. Like, what is a museum? Who is the person who goes to a museum and like, is sort of induced with the suggestion of being like, an enlightened citizen, and then looks at these artifacts from like other parts of the world that are often stolen. Like if you walk into the Humboldt Forum, I think the general question we should ask is like, what is this place even supposed to do? But as you said, Kieran, like it's like very much like in your face over there. And then on another level, you have these like initiatives like a German company, this Enatrag company, that is now, the former government, that it's kind of an open question if the new government will continue this, but there is a plan to basically extract what they call green hydrogen, like basically a power source for Germany and the global north from Namibia, because Namibia has so much like wind and so much sun. So they're building these like really sort of like kind of neo-colonial farms and to harvest the wind and the sun energy and get all that energy, like a lot of that energy back to Germany, which for Germany is great because it's not only climate neutral, but it's also like it makes it independent from like Russian gas and like other bad actors and gas sources and whatever. But like at the same time, they're trying to build one of these like they're building like an extra port in order to like ship this, and one of them is built right next to the concentration camp sites. And of course the descendants are saying like, what the fuck are you doing? This is like this is not supposed to be, one shouldn't mess with this land, but this isn't really an economic consideration. So I think there's a lot of things going on parallel where you feel like there's actually like a real extractivism going on that obviously is happening on formerly colonized ground, and like it just feels as if like a lot of this language about like learning from the history or whatever, it feels kind of fake in the face of like these things.
100%.
There was one, just to kind of like tie these two topics together, there is one thing that you make mention of in this article about how because we should close out now at some point, is that Namibia relations with Germany also getting strained on the fact that Germany has sided with Israel in the ICC case.
Right.
Which does feel like God planned this whole episode for me. Like when I was making these notes, like
perfect closure. Yeah, this was actually, I mean, the dispute was, I always confused the two myself, but it was about the ICJ, not the ICC. It was like the genocide case by South Africa in front of the ICJ, where Germany fairly quickly was announcing that it will side with Israel and deliver legal support, which they have also done in front of the ICC. So you're not completely wrong there. But like the Namibian government then, right after Germany sort of announced that, was very clear in its critique level at Germany. And interestingly, like the descendants groups, the anti-A and the OTLA people, they were kind of surprised because, again, like they don't see the Namibian government as like really representing their case. They feel like the Namibian government, similar to the German government, is like sidelining them out of the discussion and trying to shut them up with a few, I don't know, few thousand euros that like aren't nowhere near enough. But yeah, Namibia was basically saying, like, the government was basically arguing, and the person who made this argument is now also no longer, he died shortly after, just for health reasons. But they basically argued that like Germany hasn't really sort of come to terms with its genocide, the first genocide in the 20th century committed by Germany in Namibia. And so they should be very cautious for, you know, making these kind of arguments in the case of the genocide in Gaza. I found this remarkable. I found this pretty remarkable to see. And, you know, like it's interesting. Like for me as a journalist, I deal with Israel and Palestine quite a bit. Like I've lived there and I've traveled there many, many times. I've been there 4 times since October 7th. And for me, going to Namibia was actually also an attempt to kind of, you know, recalibrate my brain onto like a different subject, because it's important, I think, to not be like focused only on one thing. But nearly every person I've spoken to on there was mentioning this, was like kind of saying, listen, you know, it's just crazy. Germany has committed a genocide here, and now it's delivering weapons to a country that is committing another genocide in Gaza. I mean, this was very important to the people I've spoken to. And like, as much as I kind of saw this trip as like a way to sort of like do something else, it kind of like came back home in this way. Like it really is connected. Like,
yeah, it is very much, and I may sound ridiculous saying this, but I think we've mentioned on this show multiple times, so our listeners probably know where I'm going to go with this, of like, Germany's kind of like greatest gift to its like modern self has been the sense of admitting, like, just being like, the Holocaust was the worst thing that has ever happened, and we can't top it. You can't top it. Number one, baby, best genocider, you know. And it's disgusting in a sense, like, I mean, it's disgusting for multiple reasons, but in the sense that then that like, and I think a lot of like people on the left do this too, where there's like a ranking of genocides where it's like, well, the Namibian genocide doesn't matter any less to the Namibians, or, you know, shouldn't be in this thing, like this horrible thing happened. It doesn't need to be this like industrialized horrible horror that happens during, you know, the most brutal conflict in human history. Yes, I understand the singularity argument that then like a lot of like, you know, critical theory people, the anti-Deutsch, love the singularity argument because it then like satisfies their thirst for why they need to defend Israel. Well, because the singularity that we committed the most evil thing, the most industrialized genocide. But at the end of the day, you know, there shouldn't be this like, oh, well, you know, and even in the sense that then we like kind of talk about it of like, oh, it was like the warm up for Germany to do the big bad, you know, like there is, you know, even just like the stuff like on the ground now too in like Gaza as well is like, yes, okay, like we don't need a massive body count. That's like a very American way of looking at the world, you know, like the idea that then the equivalent of like 6 atomic bombs have been like, you know, blown up in Gaza is horrific enough. The body count doesn't need to be, you know, 6 million or 12 million or whatever it is. And Germany has kind of like perfected its own image by then being like, well, you know, actually like we know how bad a genocide can be. And it's like, no, like, you know, what makes the Holocaust worse than, say, like, you know, what the Khmer Rouge did, or what makes the Holocaust worse than, say, something, you know, like another genocide that Germany did, or how the you know, plenty of genocides that the British committed, or, you know, the crime of slavery in the New World for how many hundreds of years. This idea then of this like Holocaust being like, and even the terminology Holocaust is a bit weird when you kind of like think of it in the sense of like Germany calls it like the Shoah, you know, kind of making the focus of, you know, there's a lot of like, you know, symbolism that then goes to it that then gives it, you know, that makes it almost like such an overpowering topic that you can't talk about it, you know? And it really,
it's very interesting that, like, you know, when you look at like, I mean, genocide is after all still like a legal category, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, but people always, I mean, often in Germany, in this has two aspects. Like in one way, it's often used as kind of like this kind of linguistic maximalism that only apply. I mean, that's the way the suggestion often goes when we speak about like places like Namibia or also like what is happening in Gaza. You know, I think often people say, well, no, you can't call what is happening in Gaza a genocide. It first of all, it's for the courts to decide, and second of all, this means relativizing the Holocaust. This is often an argument you hear.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, but it's not like this is like a linguistic maximalism that like only counts if there are literal concentration camps on the ground. I mean, like, this is not happening in Gaza. There's no question about that. But like, that doesn't mean that, this is simply incorrect if you look at the legal definition of it. And then in another way, which I think is also important to keep in mind, when it comes to like the persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar, or when it comes to the Armenian genocide, or to like what happened in former Yugoslavia, like many Germans are much less cautious in applying this terminology. So actually, when it comes down to it, it seems like there is a more universalist understanding, just that like one region is kind of exempt from this universalism, and that's what Gaza is really showing.
Yeah,
right now.
Yeah. We did do an episode on a long time ago. I'm proud of it. I did the research of how long it took post World War II Germany to recognize a genocide. And the clear pattern was when it was being done by our enemies, we did it real quick. And when it was being done, when we were implicated or it was being done by allies, there was hesitation, there was caution about calling it for what it was. Also, like, if I remember correctly, because I always think about like this topic of like, oh, Germany is the best genocide understander, but then I kind of look to like Armenia puts a lot of academic funding into like the understanding and universalizing the concept of genocide. Like, how does this happen? What kind of different forms can it take? But wasn't it also the political pressure of recognizing Namibia or trying to act in Namibia? Wasn't that like a weird back and forth between the German government and Erdogan? Because Germany recognized the Armenian genocide.
Yeah, I think there was certainly like a hesitation that had to do with the kind of like, I mean, this is like countries are often hesitant to grant these acknowledgements because they know this will come with like very serious material consequences. They will have to pay money. And like when you look at the 2017 case that was like brought in front of a court in New York in the US, Germany made this very blunt argument that it was not a genocide because, again, like the legal categories at the time didn't apply. But that was later kind of course corrected, and they admitted it was a genocide. But we talked about this and like with this kind of convoluted language. But sure, I think these things are connected, and like I think it is unfortunately very sad to see that these acknowledgements appear to come often only at a time when it's either politically opportune or like sort of comfortable to do so. Of course, what ISIS did to Yazidi people, I mean, not of course, but like I think all evidence suggests that what happened there was a genocide as well. But like I think that's much easier to say to roll off the tongue for many Germans, because it's like it's clear that there is an actor there that is clearly evil.
I mean, ISIS has very few fans. That's
to the ISIS fans, we're sorry to disappoint you.
Yeah, sorry. We have
all those second-hand
Späti is really popular in the Islamic State. We found out. So sorry.
I get one of those like spam emails that goes like, your podcast is charting #1 in the Islamic State. To all the secondhand Toyota dealerships out there, I'm really sorry. With that being said, we should wrap at this point.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. This were the best questions I've been asked on this subject so far. So really, like, your podcast is amazing, and like I'm a huge fan.
Holy shit!
Oh my goodness! You're an actual journalist. We respect you. This means something.
Excellent. We will link to Hanno's socials and his Substack in the description. Unfortunately, we also have to promo stuff. 18th of May. Sunday, we are doing our boycott-friendly Eurovision. All money goes to the Abu Situ Fund and Heal Palestine. So please do come on down. There is a link to buy tickets in the description. Sometimes we have people who live in other countries who then get drunk and buy about 10 tickets and then message me on social media saying, just give these away for free.
Oops.
So pay attention to our socials. But yes, please do come on down. We're going to get all dressed up and we are going to guarantee no money goes to the European Broadcasting Union. Hanno, thanks again for coming on, and we will catch you listeners on the bonus feed. Ciao, ciao.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.